As you've been reminded, we are in the middle of our family renewal series. And considering that next weekend I'll be out of town for joyous reasons, and then the following weekend, Springville Sound will be here, and then the following weekend will be the final weekend, and Pastor Ray will be here speaking. I figured that this is my one opportunity to make a contribution to this ongoing 7-part series. And I had no idea when I began to land upon a topic, the topic of fighting for your family. I had no idea how poignant and relevant that would be until earlier this week when we turned on our TV sets and began to watch the unfolding of the massacre in Uvalde, Texas. As if Sandy Hook were not enough, 10 years ago in Connecticut, as if Buffalo were not enough, just 2 weekends ago, in New York. A 18-year-old young man with an assault rifle, which he purchased a day after he turned 18. And not only an assault rifle, but body armor so that he couldn't be stopped, which is becoming a pattern now. The same thing in Buffalo, where the police officer, the security guard who was on duty there at the store that day, confronted the killer and shot at him many times, but couldn't get him because of his helmet and body armor. It's becoming, the whole idea, as we heard from the president of the NRA, the National Rifle Association, back when Sandy Hook happened, his solution was that the solution to a bad guy on the streets with a gun is a good guy on the street with a gun. Well, now that theory is, which we knew didn't make sense, that theory is now is falling apart, because even the good guy with the gun can't stop the bad guy now. It's a very, very trying situation that we face. I was heartened as I watched a Texas state senator on TV this week weeping and confessing that only months ago he begged his fellow senators to adopt just common sense laws in Texas, where to carry a gun, you would have to have some kind of clearance. And he said, my colleagues refused. And I said, we're going to pay for this. And he said, I had no idea how soon we'd be paying for this. And when we come to the end of the newscast, when we come to the end of the shock, because eventually, even though we never fully heal, we learn to deal with it better, and we do move on. And when we move on, at the end of the day, where do we go for hope? Where do we go for help? I was shocked yesterday to note a maker of the rifle that was used by the young men in this massacre earlier this week posted an ad with a toddler, and the toddler was holding an AR-15, and the caption at the bottom of the picture read, "Train up a child." train up a child. Brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, we are at war. It's a war of values. It's a war of common sense. It's a culture war. It's a political war. It is a spiritual war. When a fourth grade teacher is killed hovering over her students like a mother hen over her chicks, trying to protect them, and she's killed. And then her husband dies because he could not. He was overcome by grief. Beautiful Hispanic young woman and her husband. And now their 4 children must figure out how to continue on in life for the rest of their years. This will be their story. Where do we go for hope? Where do we go for help? That is the question today that I want to attempt to answer and to say that at the end of the day, what we're dealing with is family. Because the young man who walked into that school, who ran into that school and killed all those people is a child. He's a son of somebody from a home somewhere. In fact, he shot his grandmother in the face before he went down to the school. We've heard nothing about his mom and dad, but we do know that he's from a home somewhere. He's the son. And so, brothers and sisters, the goal today of this message, and it's not a well-constructed message. I have to say, I've been so distracted this week. I began to worry this morning about what I'm going to really say here. But let me just say, the goal of this message is that you would leave here today, and those in Zoom land, that you would leave this service today encouraged about 2 things. Number 1, that the situation is not entirely hopeless. And number 2, that you are not helpless. The situation is not hopeless because there is a God. And where there is a God, there is hope. And you're not helpless because there is something you can do. What can you do? I'm here today to suggest that you and I need to fight for the family. And I want to invite you, if you have your Bibles, to turn to the book of Nehemiah. As we've been going through this series, it's been remarkable to me how many times Nehemiah, the book of Nehemiah, the story of Nehemiah has been referenced repeatedly, even in the home evangelism studies that we're doing on Wednesday nights. Seems like every week we get back to Nehemiah. And there's a passage in Nehemiah that I want to hold up today. And if you have your Bible or your smartphone, your device, turn to chapter 4. Nehemiah 4, beginning with verse 7. And I'm going to read for you, and I want you to follow very, very carefully this storyline. It says that now it happened when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were being restored and that the gaps were beginning to be closed. I have that underlined in my text. The gaps. We have gaps in our lives. We have gaps in our society. The gaps were being closed, that they became very angry. And all of them conspired together to come and attack Jerusalem and to create confusion. Isn't that what the enemy always does? Attack and create confusion. We live in a confused society. where we don't know what right is or what wrong is anymore. Everything is up for grabs. Everything is up for debate. To confuse, to create confusion. Verse 9, nevertheless, we made our prayer to our God, and because of them we set a watch against them day and night. Now watch this in verse 10. Then Judah said, the strength of the laborers is failing, and there is so much rubbish that we are not able to build a wall. I want you to just stick a pin in verse 10. Judah is a member. Judah is on Nehemiah's side. He's not on the enemy side. Judah is the guy whose name is going to come to symbolize the people of Israel, the Jews. The word Judah means praise. Here's a guy that's supposed to be praising his way through this problem, and he begins to announce to Nehemiah, look, you know, it's not just that the enemies are trying to stop us. Now, Judah is beginning to throw up his hands and saying, look, there's too much rubbish. We can't do this. You know what I'm getting at? Just to put it out there. Sometimes in fighting for your family, the fight is in your house. Sometimes the fight for your family, the fight is in your family. We've watched Family Feud, haven't you? And you know about the Hatfield and the McCoys. And it's one thing when the Hatfields and the McCoys don't get along. The problem is when the McCoys and the McCoys don't get along. Judah throws up his hands. Now, look at verse 11. And our adversary said. So first Sanballat and Tobiah and those guys said. Then Judah said. And now in verse 11, now our adversary said. Everybody's saying something. What did the adversary say? They will neither know or see anything till we come into their midst and kill them and cause the work to cease. Nehemiah is under a threat. He's under a threat. But look at what we have in verse 12. And so it was when the Jews who dwelt near them came that they told us 10 times. So now the Jews who were nearby, they're going to speak. And here's what they say. They say, from whatever place you turn, they will be upon us. There's no way out of this. They're going to stop us. They're going to kill us. They're not going to make us build the wall. So therefore, in verse 13, therefore I positioned men behind the lower parts of the wall at the opening, and I set the people according to their, what's the word? That's what we're getting at now, because Nehemiah could have said, I've set the people according to their groups, I've set the people according to their whatever, but he chooses the word family. With their swords, with their spears, and with their bows. Verse 14, and I looked and arose and said to the nobles and to the leaders and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, for your sons, for your daughters, for your wives, and for your homes. Do you get it? In the King James, it says, fight for your brethren. That's an interesting word. But the Spirit of God would not have us wrangle over the meaning of the word. So the Spirit of God who inspired the Scriptures allowed Nehemiah to define what he means. Who he's talking about? Who are the brethren? I'm talking about your sons and your daughters and your wives and your homes. We're talking about fighting for your family. Let me just summarize Nehemiah's strategy in this passage. In this passage, Nehemiah offers a three-pronged strategy. He says, number one, don't be afraid. Don't fall to fear. Don't be afraid. Number two, remember the Lord. Remember who fights for you. As you fight, remember who fights for you. And then third, he says, fight for your family. Fight for your family. Well, how do we do that, Nehemiah? How do we fight for our family? Well, in this passage, Nehemiah gave them bows and swords and different weapons with which to guard and arm themselves in order that they might fulfill what God had put in his heart to do. But maybe the issue is bigger than that. And so I want to just hold up a couple of things today that we can glean from the story of Nehemiah. Not just from this passage, but from the entire story of Nehemiah. Number one, if we're going to fight for our families, we need to remove the rubbish. Judah said, we can't do this because there is too much rubbish. The word rubbish there is an unfortunate word because it's not like garbage, it's not like trash. You're talking about the rubble from the walls from the previous temple that was destroyed, and they came and they rebuilt the new temple, but the walls were not rebuilt, and there was a lot of debris and broken walls and bricks and stones and all kinds of stuff piled around. And before they could rebuild the wall, they had to remove the rubbish. And today, we're faced with the fact that in a lot of our families and a lot of our relationships, we've got rubbish. We've got broken walls. We've got broken down walls. Remove the rubbish. That's the first bit of instruction. The second bit of instruction, and I'm not belaboring the point because I assume you are very familiar with Nehemiah's story. Remove the rubbish, number one. Number two, rebuild the wall. Rebuild the wall. Rebuild the ancient foundations. Rebuild the wall, broken down walls. What are walls for? Walls protect. Walls provide boundaries and barriers. Walls are to be built. We need to build hedges around our families and around our children. Pray them around our children and our boys and girls. Rebuild the walls. And sometimes we have to go at it hard to get those walls rebuilt. And we know what those walls are in our own families, in our own homes and marriages. Remove the rubbish. Rebuild the wall. And Nehemiah, by the grace of God, was able with the people in 52 days to rebuild the walls around the city of Jerusalem. It's an amazing story because the people had a mind to build. But there's a third thing that we have to do. Number one, remove the rubbish. Number two, rebuild the wall. And then number three, resist the enemy. Resist the enemy. And this is where the rubber meets the road in the story of Nehemiah, and particularly as it relates to today's message. Resist the enemy. Nehemiah built the walls under a threat of the enemy. And they said, you're not going to do this, and we're going to come down and kill you and beat you up and cause confusion and drive you away. This will not happen over our dead body. And the Bible says that Nehemiah found a way to resist to resist the enemy, and he did it. He did it with weapons of war. And today I'm not asking us to go out and buy guns and use carnal weapons to fight carnal warfare. Rather, today I am suggesting that we resist the enemy with the weapons of our warfare. And the Bible tells us, Paul says to the Corinthians, he says that the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but they are rather mighty through Christ to the pulling down of what? Strongholds. They're mighty through Christ to the pulling down. In fact, if you have your Bible still open, turn to Ephesians chapter 6. Ephesians chapter 6. Beginning with verse 10, we have the passage where Paul talks to the Ephesians about putting on the whole armor of God. And Paul says, finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord. If we're going to fight for our families, we have to be strong in the Lord and strong in the power of his might. In verse 11, Paul says, therefore, put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. Newer translations say that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. Because Satan is a schemer. He's a trickster. Put on the whole armor of God, that you might be able to stand against the tricks and the schemes of the evil one. Verse 12, because we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. This is a very important point to underscore, because so many of us are dealing with issues in our relationships and in our families. And Satan would have us think that we're fighting our wives and our husbands and our children and our sister and brother. But really, Paul is saying we're not wrestling with flesh and blood, because the problem is deeper. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. Ultimately, we wrestle against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age. There are dark places in this world. There are dark places in this age that Satan is making darker and darker, and we have to fight. We have to fight against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Verse 13 says, therefore take up the whole armor of God. How are we going to fight for our families? We're going to have to fight with the whole armor of God. The weapons of our warfare are not carnal. We understand why Nehemiah gave swords and bows and arrows to the people there, but for us, we're fighting a different kind of war. So therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day. There is an evil day. Everybody, listen to me. There is an evil day. What is the evil day? In newer translations, it says that you may stand in the down day. Anybody ever had a down day? You just wake up that morning and you get a phone call and you get a text message, and it's just one thing after the next, and you can't figure out where all this stuff is coming from, and you're down. And Satan wants to keep us down. And it is in the down day that Paul says we need to be able to stand in the down day. A lot of us, our down days become down weeks and down months and down years. And there are relationships that some of us get hooked up to, and somehow it results in a down life, a down history, a long downtime. Paul says that you may be able to stand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. You know, brothers and sisters, one of the most gratifying experiences in life is to be able to come through a lot of adversity, a lot of anxiety, a lot of trouble, a lot of heartache, a lot of brokenness, things that you feel you don't even deserve. But it is to come through all of that and to come out at the other end, as Paul says here, having done all, to stand. Still standing, still here, still praying, still trusting, still believing, having done all, to stand. It's a beautiful thing. And Paul invites us here today. He says, stand therefore, having the belt of truth. Truth is up for sale today. Truth, there is no such thing as truth in the minds of some people. My truth is my truth, your truth is your truth. I make up my truth. My truth may not agree with your truth, and your truth may not agree with my truth, but in the end, it doesn't matter, because we're all making up our truth, and we're all going to get to the same place. You know, there's a word for that, you know. It's baloney. Take the belt of truth. When I don't put my belt on, depending on which pants I'm wearing, my pants begins to fall down. I got to get my belt to keep my pants up. The breastplate of righteousness. The breastplate, that which protects the heart. Feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. I need my belt, I need my breastplate, and I need my shoes. Because when there is warfare, when you're out fighting, if you're barefoot, bare feet, you're in trouble. And now look what Paul says. He says, above all, the most important piece of armor as we fight for our lives and fight for our families, he says, put on the shield of faith. And let me just remind you, and we've said this before, I've heard Brother John mention this many times in this congregation, that in the pieces of armor here, there is nothing for the back. The only reason you would have something for the back is if you're going to turn around and run. Nothing for the back. But you have the shield of faith, and the shield of faith is the only movable piece of armor, because it's a shield that you hold and you move it wherever it is necessary. And Paul says, you use the shield of faith to quench the fiery darts of the wicked. Because fiery darts, Satan is firing fiery darts at all of us. And we're getting plummeted. And some of us don't even realize it. The shield of faith, whereby you are able to quench the fiery darts of the wicked. And then he says, put on the helmet of salvation. You know, when we fight for our families, we need to remember that the most important thing that we can give to our families, the most important gift that we can give to our children, the most important heritage, the most important legacy is not our bank account, it is salvation. It is faith. Then Paul says, take the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. In fighting for our families, we need the Word of God to become prominent. When we fight for our families, we want to make sure that the Word of God has first place in our homes. The sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. And then Paul says, praying always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit. Somebody says, pray on. Babby Mason sings, pray on. For this is what the Lord is looking for. Pray on, because you'll tear those mighty strongholds down. Pray, stay on your knees, for that is where the battle is won. Very soon you'll win the victory. Pray on. Anybody want to pray today? Anybody feel like just calling upon God in a way you've never called upon him? Pray on. Pray on is how the Apostle Paul ends this passage, this section of Ephesians 12. And I'm offering that today as the weapons of our warfare with which we fight for our families. You know, for a lot of us, fighting for our families, you know, when we go to the book of Genesis, we have this example of Abraham fighting for his family. When those people came down and captured Lot and Lot's family and took him away, Abraham armed himself with 300 armed guards who were raising his own home and went after them and fought a battle to rescue his nephew Lot and his family. Sometimes you have to physically fight for your family. But quite often, it's not a physical fight. It's not a physical fight. I want to suggest to you that in the book of Exodus, if we go one book over in the book of Exodus, we have Pharaoh who declared that, you know, all the male children ought to be killed. And you had this one family, Amram and Jochebed. And they had this wonderful little boy named Moses. Remember that story? Sometimes the fight is not a physical fight. I want to suggest to you that what Jochebed did was her way of fighting for her family. I'm not going to allow the Pharaoh to kill my son. So what am I going to do? I'm going to make a basket. And I'm gonna believe God and set him on the Nile Delta and let it go and trust God, but I'm going to fight quietly and silently for my family. It's interesting in that story, if you like to line words up that match, you have a baby, you have a basket, and you have a bath. You have baby Moses. You have the basket she put him in, and you have the bath that the Pharaoh's daughter came to take. And between the baby and the basket and the bath, you end up with a mother who, because she decided to go after this and to not allow her son to be killed, you end up with Jochebed becoming the nanny for Moses, and the baby that was saved by the basket, saved by the bath, ends up becoming the baby that would save the nation and lead an entire people out of Egypt. Isn't God wonderful? But it wasn't a physical fight. It wasn't a holler your words fight. It was a mom who simply began to believe, no, I can't do this. I'm not going to let this happen. And so the word today is very simple. The word today is very straightforward. The word today is not complicated. Basically, we are asking ourselves, we are calling ourselves to war. We're saying we're not going to give up. We're saying Satan wants you to quit, but don't quit. fight for your sons, fight for your daughters, fight for your wife, fight for your husband, fight for your marriage, fight for your home, fight for your grandchildren. If you've buried your spouse and you're still here, maybe you're here. Maybe God has you here to fight for your grandchildren, to fight for the next generation, to fight for your home. And sometimes you're fighting for somebody who thinks that they're the enemy, and you have to still fight for them. Still fight for them. Don't give up. And the good part is, as we fight, we remember who fights for us. Who fights for us? God fights for us. Jesus fights for us. Our victorious warrior. Our victorious warrior. You know, I'm intrigued. When we end the service in a few minutes, we're going to sing about the victorious warrior. There is a fountain who is a king, victorious warrior and Lord of everything. My rock, my fountain, my very own. He fights for us. The only reason, the only way that we can fight is because we know who is really fighting the battle. And I'm reminded of this in Psalm 24. It's a beautiful psalm, and many of you know the psalm. Psalm 24, Psalm 24 is a psalm, a reminder of who it is, the God that fights for us. It says that the earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, and the world and they that dwell therein. When we see the world falling apart, brothers and sisters, let us be reminded that the earth is the Lord's, that this is my Father's world. And it seems like it's going to hell in a handbasket, but it is my Father's world. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. For he founded it upon the seas and established it upon the flood. Therefore, who shall ascend into the hill of the Lord? Or who shall stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, he who has not lifted up his soul unto vanity, nor sworn deceitfully. It is he that shall receive the blessings of the Lord and righteousness from the God of his salvation. Can somebody say amen to that? And where do you go from there? Where do you go from that kind of affirmation? Verse 7 says, lift up your heads. Folks, this week I had a problem lifting up my head. And there are times when it's hard to lift up your head, but the psalmist says, lift up your heads, O ye gates, and be lifted up, ye everlasting doors. Why? What's going to happen? So the King of glory shall come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty. The Lord mighty in battle. So lift up your heads, O ye gates, and be lifted up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. In fact, let me just back up a little bit because I skipped a part. It says, this is the generation of them that seek him, that seek my face, O Jacob. We need to fight for our families in order that we will have a generation that seeks God. So lift up your heads, O ye gates, and be lifted up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, and be lifted up, ye everlasting doors. Who is the King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is. Can you say it? The King. One more time. He is. He is our defender. He is our sword. He is our shield. And because of that, we can fight for our families. And you know, I gave you those 3 R's: remove the rubbish and rebuild the wall and resist the enemy. There's another R I could have thrown in there, and it's called reclaim. Reclaim surrendered ground. Reclaim the ground that we have surrendered to the enemy. Reclaim the ground that we have carelessly allowed the enemy to take in our homes and in our families. Reclaim it. Take it back. Get serious with God. And the final good news before I sit down today. The final good news of this message today as we fight for our families goes back to the sermon we heard last Sabbath from Pastor Jensen Franklin. Just want to remind you, they will come home. Remember that? They will come home. They will come home. Because he who goes forth all the time, sowing precious seeds, weeping and weeping, will no doubt come again rejoicing, bringing his sheep with him. They will come home if we fight. Brothers and sisters, we are at war, but the situation is not hopeless. And we are not helpless. We can fight for our families. Let's do it. In Jesus' name.